Welcome, everybody, to Fresh Baked. I want to talk to you guys for a little bit about whether or not Disneyland, or any Disney park for that matter, is really, really ready to open. And I asked that question because I had an experience this past weekend. I went to Palm Springs, just a little weekend holiday for Father's Day, and we happened to go to downtown. Well, went to Palm Desert, but we went to downtown Palm Springs at one point during the weekend. And it was my first experience with people not following guidelines for the coronavirus. And, normally I've only been basically to the grocery stores and that's it, really. I haven't been to restaurants, and the rules there are very, specific. You go into a restaurant, you go into a grocery store, you put your mask on, and that's it. Recently, though, they had said that in Orange County, they weren't going to require masks. They had stricken that rule, and then the governor of California comes in over the top of Orange County and says, yeah, no, about that. Yes, you are required to wear a mask in California at all times. If you're out in public, you have to wear a mask. So I have been operating for 3 months now under the impression that people were mindful of this sort of thing. And then I went to Palm Springs, and I went to downtown Palm Springs, and I was flabbergasted, to say the least, at how few people were wearing masks. I would say 5 out of 100 were wearing masks. And I would be willing to bet that Katie and Spence could back me up on this because they were there the same weekend that I was. It made me think, it made me question if I asked the question before, is Disneyland ready to open? Not so much is Disneyland ready, but are they ready for us? Are we prepared to do, how do I put this? I'm winging this, by the way, so this is not going to be scripted. More like a podcast, this, I guess. Anyway, are they ready for us to not do what they ask? Because it sure does feel like there is a certain percentage of guests out there who aren't going to do what is being asked, or who refuse to do what's being asked. Now, full disclosure, the rules in Palm Springs, as best as I can tell, which, by the way, I don't understand. Palm Springs shouldn't be any different than any place else in the state of California, but apparently they were. They had big banners out, and the banner said, if you're going to go into a business, put on a mask. And then they had signs in front of every business that was open. If you're going to come in here, put on a mask. And then the restaurant that we went to, they made sure that we had masks. They asked us, if we were feeling any symptoms, which is kind of ludicrous. I mean, who's going to say yes to that and say, yeah, I'm feeling symptoms, but I'm still going to come out? Anyway, that's dumb. That's just to cover your own butt. So that was happening, but apparently you're not required to wear masks when you walk down the streets in Palm Springs. Now, downtown Palm Springs is a very busy place. Lots of people, lots and lots of people. In the same way that Disneyland is. There are people, we were hitting shoulders with people on the streets, narrow sidewalks, but busy. People were out and about and enjoying the city, which I am all for. I am absolutely all for opening things up and people enjoying themselves. I am all for that. But there was no social distancing. I saw many cases where there was no indicators where you should stand, nothing like that. And I don't want to get on or go into too much detail about Palm Springs, but other than to say this triggered in me whether or not Disneyland would be ready for what's coming on July 17th. And it left me to wonder, are people stopped caring about COVID-19? I mean, it did seem that way. We've had, for the past few weeks, a number of distractions. Things are happening in the world that are very important and they need to be paid attention to, and that needed our full attention as humans. Still ongoing for that matter. So it did distract us from what was happening prior to that. The fact that these two things are happening at the same time the civil rights movements that are happening at the same time as COVID-19 is just unprecedented in history. And as I sit here and think about it, I mean, this year is going to be is one for the books, and we're only halfway through. But I digress. I get it. I get that people would lose track of their focus. But now that things are starting to kind of I don't know, normalize is the right word, but we have to start thinking about everyday life again. And we've forgotten, or I haven't, but some appear to have forgotten that this is still a thing. So how does Disney go about getting the average guest to care about guidelines to protect ourselves, social distancing and masks and things like that? How do they get us to care again about this? Or should they? Or can they? Is it even possible? I mean, already there was fatigue as humans. We were getting tired of it. We were getting tired of having to stay home and wear masks and socially distant. We were already getting tired of it before any of this became a thing, or before the social things that were happening. So I think it's natural to expect a certain amount of fatigue. And I think that at the outset, guests are going to be compliant. They're going to be okay with being told to wear masks, being told where to stand, 6 feet and that kind of thing. They're going to be okay with that for a little while. I'm not sure how long. Days, weeks, months, I don't know. I have a feeling it's not going to be long at all. And I do mean days. And get fatigue, coronavirus fatigue is absolutely a thing. And we're already there by the time they open the gates at Disney World and Disneyland. We're already there at the fatigue stage. We can observe what's happened at other parks. Universal, for their part, I asked around a little bit earlier about how things were going at Universal, because I had heard that they weren't being as aggressive as they could have been in terms of enforcing the social distancing guidelines, enforcing masks. That wasn't really a thing. There was a video out there that somebody spread about they had taken out all the little markings on the ground, and they were encouraging guests to fill in all available space. Now, that was a single video. There was no corroborating video or stories that went with that, but you could hear the person say it. You could hear the cast, or not cast member, the team member say it. You can hear it in the video. But others had come forward and said, well, yeah, they were saying that because Hagrid is like, I don't know what it's like, but apparently it loads very quick, like Haunted Mansion perhaps, or something like that, where they can get guests into these things constantly. It's an omnimover. And if that is the case, then yeah, you're going to see if people are being too respectful, or just the right amount of respectful, I'm not sure. But if that's a thing, then they're probably, ride vehicles are going by with no guests in them, which probably isn't necessarily a bad thing. But what they're saying is, let's go, come on, go ahead and, catch up. So I might be inclined to give them a pass on that. And then we can look at SeaWorld. Now, SeaWorld, I have heard some wild stuff coming out of SeaWorld. There was stuff posted on Twitter where, they weren't enforcing any of the guidelines. There were very few cast members, or whatever you call them at SeaWorld. I just kind of call everybody cast members. But there was very little of that going on, very little management of the guidelines going on. And even more so, it's more obvious that there wasn't any enforcement of 6 feet or of masks, because there were a lot of guests who were ignoring, who didn't want to wear a mask, or who took their masks off every chance they got, or who didn't abide by the 6 foot guidelines in queues and stuff like that. I've seen images on Twitter of people standing very close to each other at SeaWorld. So it's obvious that there's going to be a definite segment of the population ill-prepared to mind the guidelines. Now, how that translates, I mean, I don't want to get into a conversation about, well, Disneyland's different than Universal or SeaWorld, and that guests who go to Disneyland are going to be more well-behaved or whatever. I mean, some people might suggest that. I don't think that's necessarily the case, or true at all, actually. I think humans are pretty much, as a collective, the same. Individuals can be, whatever, but as a collective, as a group, we're going to behave the same if we're at SeaWorld or at Disneyland. Now, having said that, again, I think that was made obvious to people running SeaWorld, and there's a lot of complaints going on, and they since then I think that they have stepped up their game in terms of enforcement. You're seeing more, or I'm hearing more of them requiring guests to put on the masks and maintain social distance. Same thing at Universal. Apart from that isolated thing that I was talking about, most of the stories that I'm hearing coming out of Universal are that the guests are being mindful, and cast members are being mindful, also enforcing the guidelines. Now, having said all that, there are going to be significantly more people, I believe, at Disneyland. One thing that we can observe at Universal and at SeaWorld is that attendance has been pretty low. Busy on the weekends, perhaps, but overall attendance has been pretty low. I'm not expecting that at all at Disneyland. I'm expecting them to reach capacity on a regular basis. Disneyland just simply has more appeal and more demand for their tickets than Universal or SeaWorld do. So that's why I'm having, this sort of debate in my mind about whether or not Disneyland is prepared for that. And I ask that question because the frontline cast members are humans just like the rest of us, and they may or may not be prepared to address some of the things that are going to happen. And personally, a lot of the what I've heard them talk about in terms of preparedness for guests to come in is about keeping the park clean, and hand sanitizers all over the place, and they're constantly wiping down services. Those things I'm not worried about. I've never been worried too much about how clean the park is. Any park for that matter, not SeaWorld or Universal. I'm not too worried about how clean they are, because even if they're not, I can definitely do my part and take care of myself to make sure that I am, safe. No matter how many times I see a cast member wipe down a countertop at a quick service dining location, doesn't matter. I'm still gonna sanitize my hands, or I'm still gonna wash my hands, and I'm still gonna touch as little as possible. So, that's me. That's up to me and my own, my own diligence. The things that I'm worried about with respect to going to Disneyland are people not wearing masks and people not minding 6 feet. And even if you've got a guideline in place like they will at Disneyland, they're going to, from everything that I'm hearing, they're going to require masks. Whether or not the state does, they're going to require all guests to wear a mask inside the park. And they're going to encourage guests to mind 6 feet, and they're going to have 6 feet markers everywhere. That's a Disneyland policy. My concern is, just like there's fatigue with guests, with people, with humans in adhering to these guidelines, as I mentioned, cast members are humans too. And there's going to be fatigue with them too. At first, they're going to be, let's do it. Let's all, stick together and get through this. We're alone together, etc. And I fully expect that to be the case at Disneyland for a while. But how long are they going to be able to take abuse from guests who aren't interested in wearing masks? Now, again, I don't want to get into a social conversation about what kind of guests go to Disneyland versus guests at Universal or SeaWorld. As I mentioned, I believe that as a collective, humans are humans, and it's the same. We're going to behave the same no matter where we are. There is going to be minor differences, degrees of error, or whatever you want to call it, depending on how tolerant or how aggressive each park is in enforcing the rules. Some guests are going to take as much rope as you give them. Others maybe not. But as a collective, as a whole, I don't think it's going to matter. So there's going to be fatigue with cast members. There are going to be incidents with guests not wearing masks where they should. And what if? And it's not going to be a lot. Okay, it's not going to be a lot of it on an individual basis. I don't know, 10, 20 times a day, maybe at Disneyland. I don't even know what that number is. But for certain cast members, having to do that every single day or every couple of hours, that could get tiresome. It may not be a lot, but depending on the human, that could get tiresome. So I wonder how long it'll be before, there starts to get a little bit of, I don't know, animosity. And this is what I kind of worry about too, as far as, having this whole Disney experience. There's a certain expectation about what it's going to be like when you go to Disneyland, and you're going to have a Disney experience. And certainly wearing masks and minding social distance and having, upset guests is not part of the Disneyland experience. But as a counterpart, with something that I try to do as much as possible is think big picture and be reflective of things. We just had an all-out brawl in Toontown not that long ago. So it's not like, Disneyland was 100% happy with all guests all the time in its previous condition. There were certainly, every time I went to the park, I ran into an upset guest. They exist, with or without COVID-19. That's a fact. So let's not pretend that, things are that much different. But like I said, there is degrees of error. There is that, the masks and the separation, or the 6 feet. For some, that might be just enough to put them over there, just enough to trigger them where they might not have been triggered before. So that's kind of where my head is at right now, my concerns. Now, having said that, I'm still going. I'm still 100% all in. I'm just wondering how prepared Disney is going to be. I wonder, idle thought, a certain percentage of cast members at Disneyland are seniors, retired individuals who are just working at Disneyland for fun because they love Disneyland. They love to be able to be of service to people and provide, I don't know. I feel like that's a fun thing to do as a retiree, to go work at Disneyland. Something that I've thought about myself when I retire, as an old person next week or something like that. But obviously, the senior population of cast members are probably more, what's the correct word, compromised of those. We already know this, that seniors are more likely to catch and get sick from coronavirus. Therefore, they're probably not going to report to work. There are going to be fewer senior cast members on site when the parks open up again. Therefore, they are going to have to encourage more younger staff, younger cast members. I wonder if that's going to change the temperature, in the park at all. Part of the magic for me, as I reflect on that, is that quality that the seniors bring to the park. Not to say that the younger generations aren't equally magical, and they certainly are, but for me, in my own mind, there's a certain, especially Main Street, where that's that's part of the aesthetic almost. I wonder how that's going to change things, change the temperature of the cast members. And again, this is just idle speculation, idle thought. I don't know. It probably is nothing. I will say this: the younger generations certainly are more progressive than the older generations, and they're probably more aware of what this environment that we're living in is. I do feel like it's I guess what I'm saying is that they're more likely to encourage people to mind the guidelines more, the younger generation, than the older generation. The older generation, and this is just, I don't know if I'm assuming too much, but they might let more slide. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, like, whatever. Whereas the younger generation might be more likely to say, hey, put your mask on. I don't know. I don't know if I'm assuming too much. By the way, I kind of feel like I want to do a little PSA before we get any further into this. With regard to masks, one of the reasons why I was so observant or so aware of what was happening when I was in Palm Springs was because I felt like people didn't understand why masks are necessary. And I think that there's a misunderstanding from a certain segment of the population who believe that they're wearing the masks to protect themselves. And so their logic is, well, I don't need you to protect me. I'm not afraid. I'm not scared. I don't need to wear a mask. That's not why we have masks. The reason we wear masks not to protect ourselves, but to protect you. I wear a mask so that I don't pass whatever I have to you. It keeps whatever I've got, because a lot of the ways, primary way for this virus to spread is through fluids, bodily fluids. The mask keeps all that here, right? Okay, so if I have it and I'm wearing a mask, I can't pass it on to you. Now I can touch you. I may have it on my hands, yes, but that's what the social distancing is for. And that's something that I don't need help with. I can stay away from you, but I can't keep you from doing that to me if you're not wearing a mask. So this is why they say that wearing a mask, if we all did it, if even 80% of us all wore a mask, we could wipe this thing out immediately. So don't be under the misunderstanding that the mask is here for you to protect you from getting it from somebody else. It's to protect you from giving it to somebody else. I'm wearing the mask because I respect you, and even if you think you don't have it, it doesn't matter. What matters is that if everybody wore it, then that means even the people who did have it wouldn't pass it on. Little PSA. So just think about that. Don't think about it. It's an unselfish act. It's a sign of respect, provided you don't have any sort of medical reason why you can't wear the mask. If you do that, it's just saying that you respect the health of others. Now, aside from that whole conversation about wondering whether or not that relationship between guests and cast members is going to be a problem or not, there are other conversations to be had asking whether or not Disneyland is ready. And I think they will be. Actually, I feel like most of what I'm hearing suggests that they've got a pretty decent plan, or they're going to do as much as they're able to. As much, whatever responsibility or whatever part they can have, or whatever part Disney can take in making Disneyland safe, they're going to take that measure. I don't think they're going to take any short measures. But let's talk about some of the things that they are doing and sort of reflect on that. One of the things that I've heard coming out of Walt Disney World, there was an announcement made over the weekend that there will be no virtual queues, no virtual queues, no fast pass, and no single rider. Now, I had thought that virtual queues were a given, a slam dunk. They were even testing the software. From what we've seen, there were screenshots of people saying, where there was just a virtual queue for Rise of the Resistance, there was a button that said show other queues, other virtual queues. Maybe they decided not to do that. I'm curious. I'm curious to know why they decided not to use virtual queues at all. And the only thing I could think of is that they don't expect there to be big crowds. And by the way, this is no virtual queue or fast pass for Rise of the Resistance, Runaway Railway, and I would expect that to be the same here at Disneyland for Rise of the Resistance and whatever other attraction is supposed to be the biggest thing at the time, Space Mountain or something like that. So the only thing I could think of is that there's going to be too few guests to require it, which makes sense. But I'm also wondering, and this is something that we talked about a long time ago when the lockdown, when the shutdown first happened, and we started reflecting on what kind of world would we have when parks return, and we were speculating on some of the guidelines that they might enforce and the limited capacity, that kind of thing. And I had asked, let's say they limit it to 50% capacity, which is fine. But if they were also going to start enforcing social distancing within the queues, and we've seen them definitely do this, and every park anywhere, you've seen the markings in the queue. So they definitely are enforcing 6 feet. That means you can fit fewer people into a queue. And so where are those people going to be? If they're not in the queue, where are they going to be? They're going to be out in the park proper. So we thought, okay, virtual queue, so that you don't have a bunch of people, taking up space. But in the same way, and the same way with FastPass too, for every guest who's not in a queue, that has a virtual, a rise of resistance type situation, or just a regular FastPass, for every one of those guests not physically in a queue, they have to be somewhere else. Displacement theory suggests that you've got to put them somewhere. So now you are clogging up the main arteries of these parks where they would normally be in a queue. We've got far fewer people. So my thought is that Disney understood this, and they thought it better to have guests in a queue and to sort of recalibrate whatever space they had in a way to maximize the way to get more people in a queue as opposed to out in the public walkways. For example, if you get rid of FastPass and you get rid of single rider, all that space can now be reconfigured for standby guests. So that's why you don't have FastPass. That's why you don't have single rider, so that you can use that physical queue space. And it makes sense, and I think that that's wise, especially at the outset when we're going to be running at 30 or 40 or whatever % capacity. Fewer space or less space will be needed. So that makes sense now as I reflect on that. And hopefully it works out. I would like to see this in practice. But I'll tell you this, we're going to see, and I honestly wonder how much, we're going to find out what a park is like without any interference on standby. Imagine that. We've talked about so often how FastPass is a queue killer for standby. They were going to try to put it on, for example. Look at Matterhorn. Matterhorn used to be a goes quick, though. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that lingo that I just used, Fresh Baked has a term. That's a term we use. The queue goes quick, though. You can see a long line, let's say, for Pirates of the Caribbean, but don't worry about it because you're constantly moving. You're constantly going. It's not one of those queues that sticks you, like you're just stuck there for whatever. Even if it's an hour, it's a fast hour. It feels fast because you're constantly moving. It goes quick, though. Matterhorn used to be a goes quick, though. Matterhorn, when there was no FastPass, went quick. As soon as they installed FastPass, the standby line went from 30 minutes to 60 or more. Toy Story Midway Mania, when they added FastPass for that, doubled the standby. That's pretty much the standard. Take any attraction, whatever the old standby number used to be, you double that, that's your new standby line, or more, depending on how much priority they're giving to FastPass, and it can change. They can, at any moment, a cast member can say, okay, we're now going to go, 80-20. Out of every 100 guests, 80 are going to be FastPass, 20 are going to be standby, where at some other point it might be 60-40, 70-30, or even 50-50, who knows. So we're going to find out what a Disney experience might be with, like I said, no interference on the standby queue. Absolutely, it will affect the quickness of how quickly they cycle through those standby guests. But I wonder how much will Disney, are they going to reflect on that as well? Are they going to maybe change policy on FastPass? Because before this happened, in the use of MaxPass, the trend was more attractions with FastPass, not fewer. I really doubt that Disney's going to see the light and hey, guest experience is going to be improved without FastPass, which it definitely would. I have no doubt about it. Guest experience will be improved with no FastPass. But I also do like the idea myself. And by the way, when I say guest experience, I mean we will be more satisfied with getting in and out of individual attractions. Shorter wait times is more favorable than spending an hour in a queue. But, as I was about to get into, I do like the idea of being able to say, I'm going to go ride Space Mountain at 2 o'clock. It's noon now, or something like that, and saying, okay, so while I wait for my 2 o'clock time, I'm going to go get some lunch. I like that. I like that myself. Now, that doesn't say we can't do that. That doesn't mean that I can't get lunch at noon, finish at 12:30, and then go get in the 30-minute standby for Space Mountain. That's a thing. Might even be better. Who knows? But just the idea of it seems pleasant to me. One of these days, I don't know how we do it, but there's got to be some kind of study to determine that. And now I've gotten sidetracked. So, but okay, so expect that. Expect no virtual queues, no standby, no single rider. And by the way, before anybody bemoans the loss of single rider, it'll be back. Absolutely, single rider will come back because that's a method or a process that doesn't actually take a seat away from a standby guest. They only typically, that is the idea of single rider anyway, is to fill in spots that would have been otherwise empty. Let's say there's no fast pass or anything and you're just putting guests in normally standby only. That space that if you put a single rider in would have normally been empty. So there's no net loss to standby guests by using single rider. So don't worry about that. That's a thing that would still continue to be a thing. Okay, what else we got? Yeah, so one other thing that I was wondering about would be what's going to happen. What's Disney's reaction going to be when we get our first positive, result back? A coronavirus test comes back positive for a guest or even a cast member for that matter. What's Disney's response? Because I think, 3 months ago, the response to even a single case was to shut it down. Just shut everything down. And that started with the NBA. When we got our first coronavirus positive from the player in Utah, whose name I can't remember. But that was kind of the thing. I don't know if this was your experience or if it was just me, but that to me felt like the beginning of the lockdown. That was the beginning of the lockdown because up until then we were still kind of struggling or wondering how do we go about our lives with this thing out there happening. But as soon as that one NBA player became positive, then everybody just shut everything down. Now that has changed. That idea has changed in our minds since then. I don't think that people are necessarily afraid of a positive test or as afraid of a positive test out there as they were because we've seen the mortality rates and stuff like that. But I do wonder what Disney's reaction will be when they get a positive from a cast member or that somebody reports a positive after having been to Disneyland. And that will be a thing that you can do contact tracing to figure that out, I think. Especially if that guest who suddenly comes down with it hasn't otherwise been exposed, let's say. Maybe they haven't been anywhere else besides Disneyland in the last week or two. They'll be able to figure that out. I can't imagine it'll be a shut it down kind of situation. I think that I feel like we have sort of come to an acceptance of the risk, at least a little bit more than it was initially. Take the NBA for example again. They're going to start up the season again, in the bubble at Disney World. And they're going to put all the teams on site at the Disney World Resort in Florida. And they're going to put them in this bubble. And their response to a positive test isn't to shut it down. They've already said this. Their response to a positive test is remove that player from quarantine them and then continue. So it isn't fear. It's not being fear driven. It's just practicality. They're not afraid that person is somehow going to be a super user or something like that, and they're going to start spreading it everywhere. They just remove that person from circulation and keep going. And I kind of feel like that's the way the world is trending in a sense that there is sort of an acceptance to positive tests, at least in my brain. I know there's a lot of folks out there who think differently, and I totally respect your feelings about that because I was there. I was one of you, definitely. I was afraid to do anything when this first came about, 3 months ago or however long it's been. It made me nervous beyond belief just to go outside and get milk. That terrified me. I don't feel that as much anymore, just because, as how things have evolved since then. And I'm still being mindful. I'm still being careful myself. And that's kind of what I was alluding to before. I still wash my hands. I still keep my distance from people. Even if they're not paying attention, I'm paying attention to them. And I'm reading their cues. And I'm standing back and letting them pass. Or, like the other day when I was in Palm Springs, strangest thing. 2 out of 10 people are wearing masks. And I go to a stoplight to cross the street. I'm telling stories. Let's story time now. I go to a stoplight to cross the street, right? And I'm waiting at the red light. And this couple comes, I could feel them come over my shoulder. And then they stop in front of me. I'm in the front, right? And they come over and stand right next to me, which is a violation of the 6 feet, right? But they were wearing masks. They were one of the few people wearing masks. So they had that going. They were able to do that, but they couldn't also mind the 6 feet. I just found that very curious. Guys, we could knock this out. We could just make this a non-thing if you just wore a mask and you just stayed 6 feet away from each other. You could go out and do whatever you want, live your lives to the fullest. You could go everywhere. You could go to a baseball game. You could go to Disneyland. You could do whatever you want. You could go to the movies. You could do whatever you want. You could go to a restaurant, name it. You could do all that stuff. You could do all that stuff if you just did those 2 things. That's all you got to do. And even there's even actually room for error in that, as long as you, after you make that contact, let's say you do contact somebody, just sanitize your hands or wash your hands when you can before you touch your face. That's it. It's super easy. Guys, it's super, super easy to, okay. I don't know what's happening here with this little thing I'm doing, but I just went off on another tangent. Okay, where was I? So going back to that previous question, what will Disney do when they do get a positive test? We actually may have an answer, although I don't know how good an answer it is. There was, as I understand it, there was one case reported so far at Disney Springs, a cast member at Disney Springs, although I don't think it was a Disney-run operation now, so I'm not sure how much this applies, but there was nothing happened, basically. They just removed that person from their staff. I can't remember where it was. I want to say Rainforest Cafe, but at Disney Springs, but I don't think that's it. It might have been the dinosaur, T-Rex, I think it was. In any case, that location isn't run by Disney, so I don't know, whatever measures T-Rex took wouldn't necessarily translate to what Disney would do. But I am curious if it would be reported. I hope it would be, right? God, can you imagine? Think about that. What would happen on social media as soon as we get our first public announcement of a cast member testing positive at the park? Would that change your decision at all to go? I feel like no. Personally, my feeling is no, and I'll use this as an example. And I've been making this comparison for a while now, going to the grocery store. Now, I know that's essential. That's a thing that we have to do. We have to eat, and so therefore it's far more essential than it is to go to Disneyland. But, Liz said, "Hey, Dave, did you hear that the 2 positives were found at Whole Foods, right? 2 people who work at Whole Foods tested positive. So let's not go to Whole Foods." And I'm like, that's kind of silly, because that doesn't necessarily mean the whole place is, now tainted. And it's not like other places aren't. Whole Foods had no cases until it did. Okay, I guess that's what I'm saying. So just because we haven't heard anything at Target or at Ralph's or Piggly Wiggly or anything like that doesn't mean that there can't be there either. Going to the grocery store is an inherent risk, no matter whose it is. Target is no less likely to get one than Whole Foods. So it doesn't stop me from going to grocery stores in general. Now, like I said, I have to. I don't have a choice. I have to go. But, you know, there's part of us that can say, well, I'm not going to go to this place. I'm going to go to this place, or I'm going to do this thing instead of that. If you feel a need or a desire or a want to go to Disneyland, like I do, I don't think I'm going to let a positive test at Disneyland stop me from going. Just because as soon as I step outside, you know, I'm exposed to risk, and then it's up to me, and it's up to the company that runs whatever place it is that I'm going. We've got to work together on this. And again, I know I'm going to get on this soapbox again. We could knock this thing out. We could crush this if we just did those two things: wear a mask and stay 6 feet. You could do whatever you want. You could do it. You could just go out there and just do whatever you want. Otherwise, okay. Is there anything else? I've got a little cheat sheet here. Okay, no, I think that covers that part of it. I do have some notes. That the reservation system started today at Walt Disney World, and that didn't go so well. That didn't go so well. But I mean, that's to be expected. Software is, you've got to work out the kinks on software, and this is a brand new system that they haven't used for anything else. So you go live, things are going to happen. So I would have expected there to be issues, and some people reported having some difficulty getting reservations. For example, from what I understand, anecdotally, if you have an 8-day visit scheduled for the resort, for the Walt Disney World Resort, let's say you've got 8 days at a hotel, you are eligible, you can book 8 days worth of tickets, or not tickets, but 8 days worth of slots in the reservation system. You have to have a ticket as well in order to book that day. But you can make 8 days worth of reservations provided those days are available, that they're not sold out. However, if you were a guest who had those 8 days, but you were using an annual pass, then you were limited to however many. I think there's a limit to how many reservations a annual pass holder can have. I think it's 3. If you're an annual pass holder, you can only have 3 dates reserved at one time, and you can't book another one until you've used one of the other 3. So that 8-day guest wasn't able to make. Somehow they had the order of operations was annual pass holder, then resort guest, instead of resort guest, annual pass holder. So the 8-day pass holder, or the 8-day resort guests could only book 3 days. Otherwise, it was the usual stuff: bandwidth issues, the error messages saying that Lilo or Stitch ate that page, that kind of thing. But that'll get worked out. Thank you, by the way, Disney World and resort guests, for debugging this system for the rest of us. Namaste. I appreciate that very much. By the time it's time for Disneyland to do this should be a well-oiled machine, assuming, of course, that they use the same system. And then last thing, Disneyland Paris announced today that they're going to open on July 15th. And my guess is that they're all kind of using the same time frame or similar time frames to piggyback policies and things like that. Gone is the idea that they're going to observe and see how things go and then react accordingly. There's going to be just a couple of days, 4 days between Disney World and Disneyland, and Disneyland Paris is going to be before Disneyland here in Anaheim. So it's the 11th for Disney World, the 15th for Paris, and the 17th for Disneyland. No word, by the way. They're doing, not only are annual pass holders getting a second crack at making a reservation for Disney World, but annual pass holders are also getting a soft opening date, their own date, prior, if I understand correctly, prior to the opening on the 11th. So I don't know if that's confirmed, and I haven't heard anything like that for Disneyland. And I wonder if they would, using the same argument that we use in a lot of cases for Disneyland and how it's different from Disney World, and that Disneyland has a very large population of annual pass holders. A greater percentage of guests at Disneyland have annual passes relative to Disney World. I don't know what that number is, but it's significant, whatever it is. So I wonder if it would even be to have a preview date or a soft opening for annual pass holders is moot because it's going to be pass holders anyway when they open the park, I guess is what I'm wondering, if that's the way they're seeing it. We'll find out. We're going to find out more about Disneyland, I'm sure, very soon. All right, well, I guess let's wrap up. To answer the question posed in the title of this video, is Disneyland ready? Are they really ready to open? I don't have a definitive answer. I hope so. It's not Disney, though. It's not Disney as a company. It's not Disney as a group of executives or decision makers. I think they're probably going to do everything that they can. The only variable for me is the relationship between cast members and guests. And is that relationship ready? And on that note, once again, I'm going to get on my soapbox, as we've done for as long as this channel has been a thing. I hold Disney cast members to the highest standard, or not standard, with the highest respect. They are the chosen ones in my mind. They do a thing, they provide a service that cannot be understated. Every bit of joy that you feel when you're in the park is the result of individual people's efforts to make you happy at the park. They are there for you. Now, there are exceptions, obviously. There are outliers. People have bad days. But as a group, Disney cast members are to be treasured and cherished and respected every chance you get. So, if you're going to go to the park while we're in this arena of masks and social distancing and all that stuff, if you are going to choose to go to the park, I beg you, I plead with you, go with an open mind and with peace and patience in your heart. Not only for other guests, but most importantly for cast members, because you're going to run into a cast member who's going to ask you to do something, and you're going to feel oppressed, and you're going to feel angry, and you're going to feel like, why are they treating me like this? But they're doing it because they love you. They love you, and they respect you, and they want you to be happy. So they want you to have a good time, and they want you to be able to let the other people there to have a good time as well. So anytime that you feel, you have a cast member asking you to do something, remember where they're coming from. Walk a mile in their shoes and try to understand from their perspective what it must be like to deal with tens of thousands of people coming at them constantly with whatever bits of grief or aggression that they might have in that moment. I worry so much, and how I wonder how they get through every single day like they do, with peace and magic in their heart like they do. But they do, and I know this because people say, well, they come and go, right? No, they don't. People work there for years. I run into the same cast members for years. I am friends with many cast members, and they are the most wonderful people, and I love you all. I love Disney cast members to a man and to a woman. If you're going to go to Disneyland on July 17th, or anytime while we're under these conditions, please be respectful of them. Please be kind to them. Please be patient with them. And then also be patient and kind and respectful of the other guests that are there with you. Practice that respect. Show that respect by maintaining your social distance and by wearing a mask. Show them that you care. Show them that you love them by doing those things. It's as good as a high five and a hug in my book. Every person that I see wearing a mask, I thank them with my heart. And that's how we do it. That's how we do it. That's how we get through this, by thinking of the other person first. Okay, Fresh Baked, that's my rant, my hour-long discussion, or however long it's been, I don't know. I do hope, that y'all stayed for the end of this, and get the message that I'm trying to send here. Thank you, and I love you guys. We'll see you next time. Fresh Baked.